Hello everybody, today we're talking about the Jacksonian presidency. Last time we talked about his life and his struggle for the presidency and how he felt he was robbed. So, President Jackson is the first president from the West, so west of the Appalachians. He's also he was born in a log cabin, and he's the first of a long line of presidents who will say, I was born in a log cabin. So he just gives them this idea that they're a common man. Now, he claims to have been born in South Carolina, but his aunt said that he was born in North Carolina. And then, of course, Tennessee is where he made his name. So those three states claim him as their native son. Now he has a strong image because of his military background. He has he was a militia commander, and at this time, well, throughout most of our history, really until the creation of the National Guard Bureau, the militias. Now imagine the National Guard today, all the soldiers in the National Guard electing their officers. And that's what they did. So if you were a popular guy in the area, you might get elected to a number of positions. So you might get elected to be the alderman of the city, on the city, like the city council. You might be elected mayor. You might be elected to a county position. You might, and then of course you would also be elected to the local militia. So today we have this strong principle of having a separation between military and civil officials, but back then that wasn't really a thing. You wore a lot of different hats if you were a capable person, especially out west. Now, let's jump down to the spoil system. So the spoil system, to the victor goes the spoils, is the saying. And so the spoils were the appointments. So the appointments to different federal appointed offices. And so he would elect people he would appoint people who had just supported him. So they weren't always the most capable or qualified people to be in that position. They were just his supporters. Now, because of that, he had a cabinet full of people who weren't necessarily qualified. A few people like Martin Van Buren. Very, very qualified. Martin Van Buren helped him with the overall party organization, and that's how he won. We remember that. And so, because he was surrounded by all these unqualified people, he had this kitchen cabinet. So he'd go down and meet in the kitchen of the White House with these other advisors, people who were a little bit more qualified to advise him on issues. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the party organization. Now, this is what got him into office. This is good organization. It's so good we still use it today in our political system, and every other political party in the world pretty much uses this form. So you have the county organization, and that's pretty much how we do it today in the United States. You might have city organizations at different times or in different places, different countries today. But you have, and these county committees are based on the precincts, which are just there to help with voting, organization, and that type of thing. Yes.
We missed the first answer on the study.
Okay, we'll get back to that. We'll get back to that later. So the precinct, and you can watch my other video on precincts if you want to learn more about what precincts are and what they do. But the precinct sends one person to sit on this county committee, and they elect an executive committee. They also elect delegates to go to the state convention. At the state convention, we have the delegates elect the people who will go to the national convention. They also elect the presidential electors of the Electoral College for their party. And then they also adopt a platform. So the party platform. Oh, they also elect the state, did I mention they also elect the state executive committee. Now the delegates at the national convention do a similar thing. They elect the national committee, and then they nominate the presidential nominee from that party. And every party does that, pretty much the same way, or a very similar way. So it's very grassroots. And it's so grassroots that some countries, like the People's Republic of China, which is a communist, a very authoritarian country, they argue that they have elements of democracy in their party system. They only have one party. So everyone's invited to join. So that's kind of their excuse for not having, similar elections to most liberal democracies. They say they don't need those because they have the grassroots organization going on here within the Communist Party. I'm not justifying, the Communist Party of China. I'm not saying they're a democratic state, but I'm saying this is their argument that they have democracy within their party system. And the party in China is really the dominating element. So they argue that their dominating element is a democratic element. But anyway, we go on. They also nominate candidates, and so basically this is, you've got your local party organization, state party organization, and the national party organization. And that's how everybody does it. You can also see my video on political parties and how they function. Okay, back to Jackson. He hated two things. He hated the British because of his POW experience during the Revolutionary War. He also hated banks.
He hated the Indians too.
That's kind of complex. He actually had many Native Americans that in his militia. But yeah, there were some tribes that he wanted to commit genocide on.
Because they killed his family when he was a kid.
So we got the second bank of the U.S. And Nicholas Biddle is the president of the second bank of the U.S. And they're coming up for a charter renewal in 1836. Now let's go back before the 1832 election. Congress, and when I mean Congress, I'm talking about Henry Clay and Daniel Webster, and they had to plan to make Jackson look bad by bringing up renewal of the charter before the 1832 election, because they know that he is going to reject it. And what happens is he does veto it, and it leads the second bank of the U.S. into decline, and it doesn't happen soon enough, and people don't realize it, but it heads into a national economic panic, but not on Jackson's watch. That occurs on Van Buren's watch. So Jackson gets out of that.
That's probably where I should be right now.
Yeah. Next, let's go on to the Trail of Tears. Now, what happens in Georgia is Georgia wants to kick out the Cherokee, move them out to territory out west, and they take it to court. They take the state to court. And in Worcester v. Georgia, it goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and John Marshall John Marshall's still there 6 presidents later, leading the court, and he decides that the Cherokee have a right to their land. They should not be removed. And so that's what the Supreme Court decides. And Andrew Jackson does not enforce that court order. He tells the Supreme Court to enforce it, which, isn't their job. They don't have the means of enforcing their decisions. So that was very dangerous. It could have been a precedent where the president could reject Supreme Court decisions, but luckily no other Supreme Court decisions were ignored in that manner. So, and you all did a worksheet, a couple worksheets on the Trail of Tears last week. You know about the deprivations they suffered. Now here in 1832, the plot hatched by Clay and Webster do not work, and Jackson ends up winning. Now, let's go back again to 1828, because this is a long-term issue that gets to a head after in 1833. In 1828, Congress passes the highest tariff that they have ever had at this point in our history. And there is a debate that develops at this time. You have, and this debate initially is over the tariff. You have Webster, Senator Webster from Massachusetts. You have Senator Hayne from South Carolina. Take that up. Massachusetts, South Carolina, and they get into some very serious fundamentals of what this country's government is based on. Now, they agree we have a constitution, and what is that? What is more sovereign than our constitution? Where does sovereignty ultimately reside? Now, Hayne. Now, we haven't talked about these things in such a long time, so there's been some divergence of opinions. We have Hayne, who believes that the states are superior to the Constitution. Now, why does he believe that? He believes that because the states were around before the Constitution. Now you have Webster from the north, who believes that it's the people. That is where that is where ultimate sovereignty resides. Yeah, the people. Now, okay, so South Carolina believes that through due process of a nullification convention, they can actually nullify a federal law within their state. So what happens is South Carolina holds this convention and they decide to nullify the tariff. And Jackson gets very upset and decides that he's going to lead the U.S. Army into South Carolina and force them to enforce the tariff. Now, let's talk about his cabinet. His cabinet has fallen apart at this time. His vice president, who is actually John C. Calhoun, resigns over the issue and goes to South Carolina, where he's from, and convinces the state legislature to appoint him to the Senate. So he leaves the vice presidency, becomes senator, and he leads the nullifiers in the Senate. So there's an opposition against Jackson. Jackson is really upset about this because he does not want any disorder on his watch, and he sees this as disorder. And we don't want any disorder in our lives, especially in this classroom, right?
Right.
Okay, so what happens, just a FYI, when Calhoun leaves the vice presidency, the Secretary of State, I'm forgetting the name right now. What's it? No. Van Buren becomes vice president. And Van Buren was a very capable person anyway. So Jackson is set on marching into South Carolina, and the South Carolinians are ready to oppose him. But in steps Henry Clay, our hero, and provides a compromise. The compromise is that the tariff will be lowered, and we'll just forget about this nullification convention. All right. And so we avert a civil war in the early 1830s. But Jackson continues to make people very upset, and the Whig Party forms in 1834. And what do they all have in common? Why are they all gathering together? The one thing that unites them is that they all hate Andrew Jackson. Now here's the 1836 election. You got Van Buren, the heir apparent of Jackson. You have Harrison, who's a Whig, but he loses. Well, you have Webster and White all running as Whigs. And then you have an anti-Jackson guy there. So they break up the vote, and Martin Van Buren becomes president. Now, I've been talking about the bank and how the bank is falling apart because it hasn't been renewed. It disappears in 1836 because its charter is not renewed. And there's an economic panic. Now, what's a panic? Panic is like a depression or a recession. We use the term panic in the 19th century. In the 1930s, we described that as the Great Depression, partially because it depressed everybody. These panics usually only hurt a certain class of people, whether that's merchants or farmers or industrial workers. But see, the Great Depression in the 1930s just really impacts everyone. And ever since, we've used the term recession. Now, this proves very troublesome for the country and for Van Buren, and he loses the next election to William Henry Harrison, who is a War of 1812 hero and a Whig, and of course he talks about how he was born in a log cabin and drinks hard cider like every common man, but he's actually a very well-to-do man at this point. But you have to emphasize your commonness. So, in an election of 1840, William Henry Harrison beats Van Buren. Okay. However, he dies. He dies in the first, little while in the first month of his term, and his vice president takes over. The vice president is Tyler, and nobody really checked him out to see if he was a good Whig or not. But it turns out that he was pretty much a Democrat, a Jacksonian Democrat, and is antagonistic to what the Whig platform, and that's where we will leave it there for this week.